So hello everyone and welcome to the Analytics Instrumentation Sync on Tuesday, 5th of September, 2023. I want to start today with a sad and happy topic at the same time. So as you all probably read by now, there's with the whole reorg that is happening, or that was happening last week around specifically mostly the code suggestion areas and AI areas. There's also changes that come to our team, and Nikolai, who I think is right now until last week was the longest standing member of the team, is leaving for the code creation team. But at the same time, we have a new face in our midst with Sarah joining. So there's going to be, so it's also a happy occasion, and I'm looking forward to this and to the new input that we're going to get with Sarah being here. I think you've already or previously used our technology, so it's going to be interesting to have you on board now to hopefully make it better then as well. But yeah, I would like also to give those two a bit the stage. Maybe let's start with Nikolai, then you can hand over to Sarah.
Yeah, as Basi said, I decided to join code creation team, but it was a pleasure to work with all of you during these past 3 years. We created many things, broke a little, but I hope that the overall balance is positive. And I really cherish a moment with each one of you. I learned a lot from you, so I'm very, very thankful that we had the opportunity to work together. And please do remember that I'm not moving very far away. I'll be just one virtual room from here. So if anyone wants to have a coffee chat or even ask me about some dusty thing that was lying and no one would really know why it's there, you can feel free to just reach out to me and ask me either for coffee chat or ask questions. So yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you, and also welcome on board, Sarah, and I hope you enjoy and stay here. And now on to you.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I have been over in the monitor stage for the last like 4 years. It's gone through some things. I think Michaela was part of that too. a good number of like team splits, merges over and over again. But yeah, I am a little sad to be leaving Monitor Respond behind, but I'm excited to get to know everyone here and get to dig into an area that I have always kind of felt like I wanted to dig further. There's just so much here, so it'll be really exciting to get to know you all. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Sarah and Nikolai. Really looking forward to working together with you, Sarah, to kind of push analytics instrumentation forward. As you said, there's like lots of things to do here and to make better. And at the same time, loads of thanks again to you, Nikolai, for all you've done to this for this team over the last years. And all the different names it had in between, and all the different stages it was part of. But I think you really shaped this team, and so big changes coming here. Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone. Then let's maybe move on to some more project-based things that we have on the agenda today as well. It's kind of hard to move on from this topic. And so one thing I just wanted to quickly bring up, since it came up in one MR and we are doing multiple MRs around migrating to the new internal events system. Sarah, that's something that you might also then get your hands dirty with in the near future. We're migrating to a new event system from the old Snowplow and Redis HLL events. And since it came up, I just want to make sure that when we do those kinds of migrations, we need to make sure that the events that are kind of the output of these look as much the same as they did before the migration. So there's some things with internal events that automatically change. Specifically, the category of the event is preset, and it's no longer possible to fill the label field. So it's only going to have an action. But everything else, when it comes to any kind of context that is sent along with the event, be that something like namespace or user IDs or any other information that the event might want to record, those should ideally stay the same. When it comes to when we are changing the things beside, so when we look at the action, it might be, I think, didn't happen so far for the events that we were looking at, but it might be that there's events that have a very broad action name. So if like the event action is just something like, I don't know, click, then this is not unique. And so in this case, we would need also to change the action name. But then I think in those cases, we also need to reach out to the data team. I think in this case, probably also Carolyn, to understand where the event is used and what impact a change to the name or to the action would have, because that might affect dashboards or other things that are built around the event. I just wanted to bring it up so that this is kind of kept in mind when we do those migrations. Since otherwise we might run into unintended consequences where we migrate an event and then suddenly dashboards or other functionality that we were depending on no longer works. Does that generally make sense to everyone? I see a bit of nodding. Feel free to check out the EMR to look at the specifics of this. And if you're not sure, like we have a few outstanding migration issues. If you're not sure about anything within a migration, feel free to tag me or yeah, so that we can start a discussion around those. Then the next topic, I'm just going to vocalize for Jonas since we still have some time. So Jonas is in the middle of total counts to GitLab internal events tracking issue. There's a work in progress MR, and he wants to ask what we think about creating a total Redis counter for all events that are tracked using track event. The keys would only be read if an all-time total count metric is ever defined on that event. The pro would be it makes the code nice and simple because there's, I guess, one less if to check. It is more similar to Snowplow, where we can define a metric on an existing event. Cons is it makes it harder to understand when we started counting this event, since it would start counting at the point of when the event was implemented and not when the metric was implemented. And we create more Redis keys because we would automatically create a Redis key for every event that's tracked this way, rather than only the ones that have a metric associated with total counts. So what does everyone think around that?
This is about adding a total Redis metric per each event, right?
Exactly.
Indulge me, sorry. What for?
So I don't how how familiar are you with the way our Redis counters for service ping work from the top of your mind?
Enough. I think I've used them.
Okay. Yeah. So we're creating to give a bit more context. So we're trying to migrate towards a new system called internal events. And the idea behind the system is that we kind of no longer require developers to understand the difference between Redis HLL, and even Snowplow. You just have a track event method that you can call, and you need to give the event a name. So that's how you track an event. For the Redis counters and everything to work in service ping, we still need to deliver normally with our code base these predefined metrics where we tell, like we have these YAML files where we tell our code base that, okay, for this event, so for let's assume an event could be merge request gets created. So for this event, we want to have a metric that tracks how often this happens in a 28-day time span per user, for example. This would internally use the Redis HLL system automatically and then create the correct Redis keys and track that and then send it along with service ping. The one functionality that's currently missing from this internal event system is doing total counts, all-time total counts. So this is what you currently use so-called Redis counters for. So it's literally just a Redis key where every time the event happens, the counter gets incremented. And so that would give you a total count of either since the inception of this instance of GitLab or since this counter or this event was added, how often did the event happen? Like an overall total count over all time. And that's what Jonas is currently migrating. And the question there is kind of, so for Redis HLL and so on, what we need to do is we check for the presence of a metric definition to decide whether we want to create a Redis key in the first place. So only if there's a metric definition that asks for this event to be counted, would we create an according Redis key and actually kind of record the event in Redis. And the same is now I think he brings up these questions now for these total counts, whether we should also check whether there's a actual total count metric for the specific event. So someone would have needed to add a YAML file which states, okay, I want to get the total count for this specific event. Whether we want to check for this presence, or instead of checking for the presence, we just assume that, or we just by default for any event that comes in, we create a Redis counter and we increment that. And the question whether like the metric definition file in this case would only be used to decide whether to actually then send this counter along in the service ping. So otherwise it would just not be sent if there's no metric defined. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
No worries. I think there's loads to discover there, probably.
Yeah, I think I would have to go through the MR first, I think, to get some sensible feedback. But I'll get back to this.
Okay. Does anyone have feedback from the top of their mind? I mean, it's totally fine if we just use this to kind of raise awareness around the issue, and then everyone can contribute asynchronously to the MR as well.
So this is only for the internal events, not for all of the events, right?
Yes, I'd assume I didn't check the actual code implementation. I'd assume so. since our goal is to get rid of the old Redis total counters anyway as soon as possible. Since those are only 90 metrics, I think the last time we counted. So I don't think it's going to touch. I would be surprised if it touches the old implementation or has any impact on this. Just going forward.
Yeah, because about the first con, that it makes it harder to understand when we start counting an event. I believe this shouldn't be a concern because we will know when given internal event was implemented.
Yeah.
Or when this logic for counting totals was implemented in case of older internal events. Yeah, so I think it will be just a question of whether we can afford to add all of these Redis keys, even in case where sometimes they would not be used. But for me, for example, it's hard to say because I don't know if before we had some issues with having too many Redis keys, or like how do we look in this category?
I mean, it's the case might be good to that we still have Nikolai here for today. Do you remember, was there ever a discussion around our usage of Redis and that potentially being a problem that we I don't know, use a lot of?
Not really. Not really. Bigger problem was the time operation, like how long reading some keys takes from the Redis, but it does not affect the all times. They are very performant. The issue was when there was like this very large aggregation of the Redis SLL keys. It was 20 different keys which were merged on the fly, and even though in terms of our perspective it was quite fast because like it was a matter of seconds or even fraction of seconds, because Redis is expected to be very performant, it raised the issue that it blocks some other operations. So, but in case, in terms of the total counts, I don't remember any issue around us using too much of the memory. But just so we can discuss it with, I guess, scalability team, just to double check how they see the issue. But after all, if we want to track something, then I would say that we have to start somewhere. So it's kind of the price that you have to pay for tracking. Probably it will be more matter of having this hygiene of like, okay, if you have the event that no one really uses, there's no metric on it, and it stays like this for like half year. Check if the raw snowplow event is used in any kind of dashboard. If not, then like cut it down.
Well, if the metric wasn't being reported even in the ping, you wouldn't know, like, right? Wasn't that the premise? Sorry, that like it'll get added to Redis, but it's not actually getting reported in the ping unless you add the definition file.
Yeah.
So like you don't know whether your users actually want it. I've maybe I'm confused. I'll come back to it later. It's okay.
Internal events, unless something changed since I looked into that. The premise was also that we're gonna report the events as the snowplow events on SaaS and record them as a service ping on self-managed because we cannot get snowplow events from self-managed. So there may be a case when somebody is using the event only on SaaS as a raw snowplow event, and is not really interested in any aggregation that may come from the service ping. That's why was this distinction made, and I don't know if it helped explain it or actually made it worse.
I don't know. I haven't dug in too much. I'm sorry to derail. I'll
No.
I need to take some time to do that still. So
No worries. No worries at all. And I think in general this is something that we might come back to also with other cases around, for example, just something I remembered that we can also look to in the future is whether we want to automatically create 7-day and 28-day at the same time for a specific metric, because we just assume that it's going to be useful. In general, I think that's something, the question of making more assumptions around how our metrics are being used, and therefore going into those doing things by default might come up again. All right. I know. Welcome, Jonas. I think you now missed most of the discussion.
Thank you. I'm like, what did they say? What's the opinion?
You're gonna need to wait for the video.
Oh my God.
But
yeah, that's fine.
Nothing revolutionary, I think.
Okay.
I think the main outcome was that there's no awareness about any space problems around Redis, so that this shouldn't be a problem from us, like space or performance point of view, creating the keys. We didn't really come to a conclusion around the kind of usability advantages and drawbacks of your suggestion, but that's, I think, something we can also do asynchronously. I don't know, Miles, do you have an idea how the total counts are mostly used? Like, do people actually look at the whole total count, or are they mostly used to then kind of as a stopgap solution towards a complete count on a milestone basis, so that people kind of start comparing, okay, it was, I don't know, 10,000 MRs in 16.3 and 8,000 MRs in 16.2, so there was a jump. That the actual number I'm interested in is the 20,000 that happened in between.
Yeah, I think the 28-day counters, if that's what you're talking about, the 28-day counters is kind of the thing that's most relied on, and the all-time counters are used for more context, just like just kind of seeing like given the historical context of how much they've used that feature, whatever, what's their 28-day usage look like. So I definitely think the 28-day counters are more relied upon, and the all-time counters are more just for historical context. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, I'm more asking, in a sense, I'm kind of also trying to get it. Maybe I probably didn't put it right. So because the 28 days counter that are currently implemented with Redis HL, like if you want to have a 28-day counter, it's always based on this uniqueness criteria. So you're always like, you would need to do it kind of unique by user or unique by something.
Correct.
If you just want to have a total count, like not even thinking about whether it's all time or 28-day or whatever time frame you want to look at, if you just want to have a total count on service ping, you can just use the Redis count, like the all-time Redis counters. There's no other option yet. I mean, we're going to change that soon, but right now there's no other option. So I cannot have, if I don't do some weird things or kind of workarounds, I cannot have like a 28-day counter of how many merge requests happened, for example, or how many issues got created. I could only do it by issues on a per user basis. So what I was wondering is, in theory, on the warehouse level, you can use the total count as a stopgap measure to kind of recreate this, because you can just look at the movement.
So like you can kind of infer what the 28-day value would be just by looking at the difference in the all-time values, is what you're saying.
And exactly. So along the service pings that got reported.
Yeah. So that is done to a certain extent. We don't like do that officially, but you can just look at it. You can look at 1 month ping and then the next month ping, because we're only showing one ping per month. You could show the weekly pings too. the reason we don't like encode that, it'd just be a simple kind of window function in SQL to, you could create basically a pseudo 28-day metric by looking at the difference, 4 pings later in the all-time metric. Mm-hmm. The reason we don't do that is because it basically assumes that for each customer, or for each installation, I should say, there are exactly 1 ping per week, and it comes every single week. And just for a number of like operational reasons, that's not true. Also, just because like we're showing 1 ping per month instead of every single ping, which would be a week, you just get into these weird situations where like, because some months like we'll effectively have 5 pings, and if some months we'll have 4 pings, like the window of time you're comparing on, just because the way we're showing the data isn't the same. So like there are just a number of operational reasons we don't officially do it, but people can look at it and kind of say like, okay, last month they had 5,000 all time, and this month they have 6,000 all time. So they did about 1,000 in the interceding period. But just because of like the things I talked about, we don't, it's not an official calculation. So. Okay.
Yes, but
I can actually, from a user perspective, we did do this all the time. Like in our monitor respond dashboards, not just for like product direction things, but also for figuring out the impact of the features we were adding. Mm-hmm. Because you didn't need good numbers, you just needed any numbers. Yeah, so we did use that a lot.
Cool. It's good to know. That's
so were you explicitly using the all-time counters and kind of looking at the difference between them because you didn't have any other numbers? Okay, cool. That's good to know.
Yeah. So that also verifies the need for having timeframes there. Cool. I think that's really helpful, Sarah. And that's now we just need to kind of figure out how to kind of conserve your user perspective as long as possible before you get into too much into the details, and kind of get this perspective, because this is definitely helpful, because I think all of us can tend to get into the weeds too much of the actual implementation and lose the user perspective of, okay, how are these the metrics and events and everything actually used. Thanks a lot. All right, I think we're at time. So everyone can also jump into the MR and I think provide further feedback to Jonas there. There's a social call after this for anyone who has time and wants to join. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining and providing your input. See ya.
Yeah.